can't hold you and film this video. Look. Let me put you down right there. Put your leg over here. Yes, I know. Life is so hard. What up, nerds? My name is Leslie Smith. Welcome to the Nerdy Narrative, where today I will be sharing with you about all of my recent reads, some overall thoughts and opinions on the books that I've finished, some current thoughts on the ones that I'm still working on, and then I'll show y'all the books that I plan to read next. Two quick things before we get into the books. The first one being the Wine and Crime Book Club selection for the month of September is going to be The Maid by Nita Prose. I've heard a lot of really great things about this book. I also have seen a couple of my friends didn't particularly care for it, so I can't wait to see what the book club thinks of it. I know that everybody seems to be loving our current month's pick, Razorblade Tears, which I'll be reading that one a little closer to the live show, which is the last Saturday of the month. For some reason, the date August 27th stands out to me as that being the last Saturday of August, and that'll take place at 1 p.m. I need to check in and see if I'm going to have any guests that are going to join me for this one. I am very excited to see how I'm going to like this one. I can't wait to start clicking on all of these spoiler boxes in Discord from the people that have been reading it and loving it. It's killing me. It is killing me. And then the second thing is to say a huge thank you to the patrons who are so kind to support the channel monetarily each month. All right, y'all, now let's get into the books that I've recently finished since the last time I updated you. We'll start with the one that I finished on my Kindle so that I don't forget it. I had started this one last week when I checked in. It's called Hacked in Two. It is comprised of two novellas. One is by James G. Carlson. It's called Red Falls, and the other novella is by Damon Manx, and it's called Deacon. Both of these novellas are what I would call psychological horror. They are definitely going to mess with your perception of reality and make you think twice about visiting rural areas. The first novella by James G. Carlson, our main characters, June and Ezra, are taking a trip to rural Pennsylvania to a small town called Red Falls. They had read online that Red Falls hosted a wine festival each year, and they decided, spur of the moment, got a wild hair to just pick up and go out there for the festival. They get there, and unfortunately, the wine festival is not taking place, nor has it taken place for the last 5 years. Because it's so late in the day, the couple decide they're gonna just grab a room at the bed and breakfast and return home the next morning. However, later at dinner, at the only place in town that you can eat, they met the acquaintance of another couple who was there for the same reason, also sharing in the disappointment that the wine festival was not taking place. While they are also planning to cut their trip short, this couple has decided they're going to stay and take a hike around the area before they return home, and they invite June and Ezra to go. The group meets up the following morning to start this hike, which also starts our adventure in horror. And I know what I've mentioned so far sounds like some familiar tropes, but this is where the story takes its turn and gets its own unique and original spin that I loved. When I updated y'all last week, I mentioned that June and Ezra were very politically motivated, and I just really didn't like that. Fortunately, that did die off after about the first third of the novella, and then the focus is taken off their political views and it is strictly into survival. James G. Carlson did a phenomenal job setting the atmosphere and the setting for this novella. I just kept getting mental flashes from the movie Wrong Turn, as well as hearing the banjo playing in my mind from Deliverance. We learned the history of Red Falls and the lore, and just it's so good. I don't want to tell you anything else because the end of this one is just a masterpiece. And then switching over to Deacon, which is the second novella in this collection. Y'all, I didn't think I was going to be able to read this one. The beginning of it was extreme horror, body horror, just I didn't think I was going to be able to handle it. Think The Walking Dead meets the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I kept going because while it was really disturbing to read, which is I'm sure the author's intent, I needed to know what was going on here exactly. And I'm so glad that I did, because it turns out to be one of my favorite kind of stories to read. It's an author. It's a story about a writer. And it's one of those speculative styles where the author isn't sure what's going on. The line between reality and fiction is just getting really blurry. And while there is some intense scenes in it, it's So good. Again, it's so hard to tell you about it because I want to tell you my favorite things, but all of my favorite things about both of these novellas are straight up spoilers and I don't want to ruin it. I would just highly encourage you to pick this up. Even though both of the novellas contained elements that I don't particularly pick up, like anything very political or extreme body horror, I don't typically pick those up, but when you have a couple of authors who can write their asses off doing it, you just can't help but appreciate the experience regardless. So chalking up another win for me under James G. Carlson's name, and then we've got our first win under Damon Manx. I will definitely be reading more of both. Next up here in the pile of what I finished is DeathNote volumes 1 through 3. This is the black edition, which has volume 1 and 2 that I bought years ago and read, and then I never finished the series, which is why I got the rest of them from my library. I did check out the entire collection from my library. 1 and 2 have never shown up, so luckily I still had this copy on hand to reread. And I have to say, rereading volumes 1 and 2, I enjoyed them so much more on the reread than I did the first time. In fact, the first time I read volume 1, I didn't really care for it until some of y'all commented on the video I made and said, hey, try the anime. The voice actors made these characters come off the pages for me. They were no longer flat. They became real. They felt 3D. I could then hear the voices. Sometimes I can't give these characters a voice, so having things like an anime really comes in handy, and I absolutely loved volume 2, but on the reread, I was just more taken in with the cat and mouse game between the main character Light Yagami and the legendary detective L. His identity is a secret, much like the author. Nobody knows the gender or real name of the author of DeathNote, which is so cool. That just adds an extra element to it that just makes it a fun reading experience. So I read the first 3 volumes. I am vlogging this experience, so I won't take up any more time on this series here. That video will hopefully be going up in a couple of weeks once I finish the subsequent volumes in the series, and then we'll talk about it more there. And since I'm on the subject of manga, we'll just continue down that vein with the Liminal Zone by Junji Ito. This one just came out at the end of July. A buddy read this with my friend Una from the Codex Cantina. I believe for both of us, this is a top tier read. I know it is for me. It has taken the place of Frankenstein, which is another collection of short stories by Junji Ito. This one was just far superior in that I loved every single story. Now, Frankenstein, I liked several of them, especially the title one, Frankenstein. The retelling was just perfect. This one has 4 short stories in it. I loved every single one of them. They each were very different and unique from one another, but what they had in common is what happens to a soul after death. I did not make that connection right away. Una and I were talking about the stories as we were reading, and then of course after we finished reading, and he made the connection, and when he mentioned it, that just clicked into place for me as well. If you're a fan of Junji Ito, or you've read some of his work, or you're even looking for a good place to start, the Liminal Zone. Plus, it is just absolutely gorgeous. Just gorgeous. I love how he uses foil on his titles. And then this is the back cover. I already have his next 2 upcoming October releases pre-ordered, as well as Una, so we'll be buddy reading those come October. So next up here out of the completed reads pile is Ledge by Stacey McEwen. This is the first book in the Galatian trilogy, and I will tell you, I'm extremely glad after reading this that it's a trilogy, because it wasn't enough. Did it get a good ending? Yes. There weren't any cliffhangers, so you can read this and be perfectly happy waiting for book 2 to come out. I loved the characters. I wasn't ready to say goodbye to the main characters, Dawson and Ryan. I loved how snarky and sassy they were with one another, but what I really loved, with this being a fantasy romance, Dawson was not a damsel in distress. She was perfectly capable of coming up with her own agenda and handling business. Our other character, Ryan, just as strong, just as capable. He had a plan. He was putting it into action. He didn't need help from anyone either. I loved their independence. I love that we didn't spend any time in this book with them second guessing themselves or being insecure, and the other one has to build this one up in order for them to understand what their purpose was in life. No, these 2 knew what they wanted to do, and they went about doing it. With or without help, they were going to get things done. I loved that. And because we didn't have to spend time doing that, We got straight to the plot, which for me is what was most interesting in this book. And you're probably thinking, Leslie, you said fantasy romance. Isn't this just supposed to be about romance? Okay, here's what I've learned about fantasy romance. I used to think it was smut with a little bit of fantasy elements thrown in. And that turns out to not be the case, and I will be absolutely eating up more fantasy romance in the future. Yeah, these two develop feelings for one another over the course of the book, but that's not the main focus of it. The book gets its title, Ledge, from the place in the book where our story starts. Dawson is an inhabitant of the Ledge. The Ledge is really nothing more than a precipice, a small area, a frigid and cold area. And the people who live on the ledge can never ever leave because on one side they have a mountain, on the other is this chasm that just drops forever and ever. They don't know how deep it is, but it's deadly. You might be wondering, well, if there's no way for them to leave, how did they get there? The Glacians, they're these mystical creatures with wings who herded and carried all of these people to the ledge and left them there. The Glacians do sporadically bring supplies and rations to keep the people alive, and then each time the seasons change, the Glacians come and do a culling, a selection, where they choose 6 humans to take away. And the people of the ledge assume that this means death in some form or fashion. Another selection day rolls around and Dawson has finally had her luck run out and she's selected. What she actually discovers about this process is very interesting and enlightening. And she also ends up managing to escape with the help of a half-Glacian named Ryan. And so our adventure begins. And that is all I'm going to give you about the plot. I don't want to reveal the rest. In my opinion, it's so much better for the readers to discover that when the characters decide to reveal that to you. This story was definitely on the lighter side of magic. I do feel that the author is definitely going to expand it further in the upcoming books, and I'm very eager to learn more about it because what was introduced that I got a taste of, I found it very intriguing. So I'm excited to continue the series to learn more about the magic system. I also really enjoyed the world building, the setting. Now we didn't go very far. We really just stayed between the area that contained the ledge and where the Glacians resided, plus where the rest of the human population are called Tersaw. The other side of them, there's an ocean that these people apparently aren't advanced enough to have ships to sail across it. So while we do stay in this general area, the author did a great job with her descriptions between the frigid cold of the ledge and where the Glacians live, and then the contrasting, beautiful, warm, sunshine, green fields of Tersaw. So yeah, after reading The Lady of the Mark and now Ledge, I owe the subgenre of fantasy romance an apology. I am so sorry. I assumed these books would be all smut and no plot. Both of these fantasy romance novels had excellent plots, lots of action that had me turning the page. It just had an extra element where 2 characters developed feelings for one another. And then the last book that I finished, which I finished late last night, it wouldn't let me go. I had to know how it was going to end. Mistborn Era 1, Book 2, The Will of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. I loved this book. Oh my gosh. There were so many things. I just ran through. So in the beginning, I did not like Vin. I did not like her character. Dang, Sanderson just totally changed that with her character development over the course of this story. I'm in awe. I'm in awe. This guy can write some dang characters. He can write moments. I've always said that Brandon Sanderson has a hand-holding writing style. And what I mean by that, he's very patient in teaching you all about the world and the magic system, which is great because allomancy is a very complex magic system. So I'm very appreciative that he goes slowly for me. But where Brandon Sanderson excels is writing inspirational characters, moments, inspirational moments that are unforgettable. No matter if you only read his books once, you will never forget certain moments from certain characters. And that wraps up all the books that I have finished since the last time I talked to y'all. If you would like more information, I do have non-spoiler reviews written for all of these books. I'll have my website linked in the description box down below if you want to check those out. And now let's talk about what am I still working on. Let's start with The Babysitter Lives by Stephen Graham Jones. It recently came out on August 9th. It is just in the audiobook format, and I did start it on August 9th. And you're probably wondering, wow, how have you not finished it? Isn't it only like 7.5 hours long? Yeah, so it is extremely boring. It's so boring. I should really DNF it, but I keep hoping that it's going to have this big, huge twist, turn around, and get really good. For those of you who have watched the channel for a while, you know I love Stephen Graham Jones. He is one of my top favorite horror authors, but this just ain't it, y'all. I listened to it this morning while I was getting ready. The entire time I was doing my hair and makeup, he spent all of that time on a character who was trying to get out of a room that she was in. We're talking at least 30 minutes of this person trying to figure out how to get out of this room in his house. I'm really just checked out on it. It's almost just like background noise to me. All the people who listened to the arc of this that were posting on Twitter that it's one of the scariest things they've ever read, I'm just confused here. Do you have this phobia about babysitters? Like, what was it that was so scary to you? Because I'm not seeing it at all. There was one moment where we got some information that could have really been turned into something creepy, and Stephen Graham Jones just let the moment pass, and I was so confused by it. I've got around an hour left, and I just don't know if that's enough time for him to really do anything spectacular. I'll finish it, but only because I don't have another audiobook to listen to right now. If one of my library holds were to come in, I would definitely drop it in favor of the book that just came in. This book for me right now, if you're using the 1 to 5-star rating scale, I would say is sitting at a 2. I really hope something changes in the last hour and a half, because if it doesn't, I'm gonna be upset that I didn't DNF this book. In my personal opinion, it's so far below what he's capable of that I'm just left feeling disappointed. We'll leave the disappointment behind and talk about a book that I am very excited to continue. I started my next SPFBO read, which is Where Blood Runs Gold by A.C. Cross. I was in love after chapter 1. I didn't want to do anything but sit and just read as much of this book as I possibly could. It's a Western fantasy, and I was thinking I might not would like it. This story starts in a town called Santiago when Sheriff Errol Thorpe walks into the saloon. The sheriff was out hunting for a group called the Elder Boys. I'm guessing they're some sort of outlaws, but he had to take cover because a dust storm blew in. As the sheriff is sitting at the bar drinking, he sees a guy he's had trouble with before. In fact, the last time he saw him, he had beat the tar out of him and said if he ever saw him again, he was going to kill him. As it turns out, this guy, Merle, has kidnapped this family, and they're going to force them to work in the mines because Merle happens to work for the Elder Boys too. And the action just kicks in true Wild West fashion, but just amp it up a few levels. I'm so excited. I think I'm going to have a great time with this book. It's going to make my selection for a semi-finalist so hard. Like, how am I going to choose between all of these great books that I've gotten to read for SPFBO? Who is going to go forward? I don't know. I still have one more book to read after this one, and then I have to choose. Those are the only 2 books that I'm still currently reading. What am I going to read next? First off, I will hopefully be continuing the DeathNote series. Plus, I have the new short story collection that came out recently. And then one here, I think is just a collection of short stories about the detective L. So hopefully I will get to finish this series this week, get that vlog wrapped up, and get that up for you guys to see about my whole experience reading the series. So for my next book, I want to head up one of my review reads. So I chose The Sadiest by fellow reviewer and booktuber Austrian Spencer. This one has a very unique and bizarre take on death, I am so excited to finally read this one. So many of my reviewing friends have read it and absolutely loved it, and they said I'm gonna love it, so I just cannot wait. If I fly through the Stadius like I have a feeling that I'm going to, then I'll be getting started on Jen Williams' The Ninth Reign, which is the first book in the Winnowing Flame trilogy. This was my patron pick of the month. My patron Stacy picked this one for me. She has read, I want to say, the first two and loved them. I can't wait to read this one and see how I'm gonna feel about it. So these will be my next two books that I start, and that should get me through to the last week of the month. And then I hope I might have time to catch up on my Stephen King short story read along. I have fallen a week behind. There were so many good books. I started like 5 really good books at one time, and it was so enjoyable but horrible at the same time because I couldn't decide what I wanted to read. And then I would just pick one, and then I was like, well, I'll just read this one for a couple hours and I'll switch to the other. No, that never happened. Whatever one got picked was the one I stayed with until I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. Such a great week of reading. That's a wrap for me today, y'all. That is all of the things that I've been reading since the last time I checked in. I can't wait to get started on more stuff to talk to you guys about next week. I hope you have an amazing day, a wonderful weekend, and I'll catch you in the next one.